Before you say anything, I know you're probably shaking your head, shouting that Noria is a liar and a hypocrite, or that I speak out of both sides of my mouth because how can I make the claim that Portia Featherington is the best mother in Bridgerton when, in my very own words and barely 2 months ago, I made a video stating clearly my claim that there are no good mothers in Bridgerton? And to that I say, both statements are true. There are no good mothers in Bridgerton. I stand by that. The mothers in the show are flawed women who are doing their best, yes, but aren't mothers I would consider good in that sense of the word. However, there not being good mothers in Bridgerton doesn't mean that of the ones we were given, Portia Featherington does not stand heads and shoulders above them all. As someone who takes initiative, is protective, refuses to allow circumstances dictate the fate of her family, will go to battle for her girls, and is willing to tell the most uncomfortable truths. And over the course of this video, I do hope I'm able to convince you of that. But before we start, let me know in the comments right now if you agree or disagree with me on whether or not Portia Featherington is the best mother in the show. And then you can come back to your comments after this video is done to let me know if I either confirmed your position, got you to change your mind, or left you convinced that Noria is talking out of her ass. Either one of them is fine, really. Now, I've already established that for me, Portia Featherington is a girl's girl. I have a video where I break down why and how I could come to that conclusion, and there is a high possibility that if you're watching this particular video and are subscribed to me, that is how you discovered my channel. If you haven't watched the video yet, I will have it pop up on screen and also leave it in the description box so you can watch it after you're done with this one. But like I said then, and I'm saying now, Portia's priority has always been a focus on making sure that the young women in her life, her daughters, and to some extent Marina, which, yes, I know she might not have gone about that particular plot and problem with the grace that a lot of us would have preferred, but we can still agree that it was a looking out of sorts, because it is clear that Portia's focus has always been on making sure that the girls in her life do make better choices and are able to secure for themselves a life that might not be glam or the best out there, but one that would benefit them given the times they were in and the situations within which they found themselves. Because I know a lot of people like to think otherwise. By virtue of the kind of story Bridgerton is and what is being told us, we the audience expect a romance and a happy ending. However, the world of Bridgerton is not a romance. It might be the setting within which the romances that are focused on the Bridgerton children and their partners is told, yes. But fundamentally, it is not a world of romance. A lot of the characters in these stories are not aware that they are in a romance. And so therefore, the decisions they take is done with the situation, the circumstances, the world, and the options available to them in mind. It is why not every mother is as obsessed with having a love match like Violet Bridgerton is. They know how unforgiving their world can be. To them, romance is a fallacy. Love grows cold pretty quickly in the face of indifference. And sometimes all a woman can hope for is a husband that is kind, or at least acceptable in some sense. That isn't Violet's story or situation. She looks through their world with more rose-colored lenses. Because we can see clearly from her story that Violet Bridgerton is a sheltered woman. She had a sheltered life as a daughter and as a wife, and for a large part as a mother as well. And so therefore, her perception of what her children need to survive in a world that will sooner spit them out than make space for them is very different from Portia. And I think part of that difference is because Portia, unlike Violet, has only daughters, which upped the stakes for her family compared to the Bridgertons. From the story we've experienced in the last 3 seasons, and Queen Charlotte as well, we can see that the world of Bridgerton is very traditional and very patriarchal. There is a sort of security to be found when the man of the house, whether a husband or in the case of the Bridgertons, a son, is dependable and can be counted on. It goes a long way to giving his family some peace of mind. And so therefore, a situation like that makes it only logical that the women and the daughters have a bit less agency, because they aren't burdened to step further and take on that mantle. Portia Featherington is very different. Having only daughters and a useless head of house meant that she had to take initiative more than any other mother in the story. And we see this reflected in a lot of decisions she is forced to take. Archibald Featherington's death meant that when the truth of Marina's pregnancy is discovered by the Featheringtons, the only course of action that was available to Portia, which was to send the young girl back home, wasn't something she could pursue, as Lord Featherington's death to Mr. Thompson meant Marina had to stay with them. And if we step away from how much a lot of us love Marina and understood her situation and where she was coming from, and looked at the situation within which Portia was stuck, she had to keep this young woman who her husband refused to allow her sent back to where she's from. And said girl was refusing Portia's suggestion that she find someone else to marry quickly before her pregnancy started showing, so she could pawn off the fathership of her unborn child to her unsuspecting husband for the sake of her love for some man who was not responding to her letters, nor had he shown up to claim the woman he supposedly loves and the child they are meant to have together. Then it makes a bit more sense why she had to take the action that she did. Say what you would, but I personally think it was a brilliant case of Portia taking initiative to try and fix everybody else's mess. It was her way of helping secure and protect her daughter's futures and reputation, something that seemed to be of zero concern to Archibald. And honestly, Marina didn't quite care either. And I think a lot of conversations about Marina likes to ignore that. The fandom likes to infantilize her in a way I find fascinating in their bid to vilify both Portia and Penelope for the decisions they took with regards her, when if Portia hadn't taken initiative, Marina would most likely have just sat in their house and eventually started showing, which would have been disastrous for the reputations of the girls. Say what you would about Portia, but in that situation, she was thinking about her daughters, who she didn't want caught in the scandal. And she was thinking about Marina, who, yes, we the audience knew that George really did love her. And the reason why he didn't show up was because he was dead. But how was Portia to know that? How was anybody in their world supposed to know that? Theirs is a society where it wasn't uncommon to have a man take advantage of a young girl and then abandon her to her ruined fate. If you're a Jane Austen fan, you've seen this time and again in her stories. Rakes like John Willoughby, George Wickham, Henry Crawford, Mr. Elliot, John Thorpe are a dime a dozen, proving that Regency England does recognize that there are men like that who take advantage of the naivety of young girls and would leave them with the thoughtlessness of their existence, moving on to the next without thinking twice. We can conclude that Portia Featherington is aware of men like that. In fact, she's probably had interactions with those type of men when she was younger and knows what the results are. It is why she takes Marina to the other side of town to show her what her future could possibly look like. Marina unfortunately wasn't willing to listen. And I think that was when Portia realized that she was going to have to take the initiative and act like the mother that she is. Do I necessarily agree with her actions of forging George's signature on a letter to get Marina to move on and consider her options? Yes and no. No, I don't agree because that was dishonest. But yes, I do see why she did it. To her, no decent man or gentleman would have sex with a young woman he has not married or is not engaged to. That is not what their society expects. And so to her, he's a rake who got what he wanted. And now Marina is saddled with the results of that. She had to make the first move to protect this willful girl who would not listen to her for her own good. And in protecting Marina, she also gets to protect her daughter's reputation. This instance in the show shows quite clearly how Portia Featherington both takes initiative and is protective of her daughters. Matter of fact, we see this as a recurring theme for her in the story. It is the fact that she's quick to take initiative, which often rises when she has to protect her daughter's interests, that had her being suspicious of Lord Featherington's conversation with Albion Finch, that led to the other taking back his interest and anticipated proposal to Philippa. We see Portia taking initiative in that she goes investigating and is able to hold up concrete proof that not only showed that Archibald Featherington had not only spent all their money, but that he had also spent Philippa's dowry as well, which meant that her daughter's future happiness was threatened. Like I stated earlier in this video, Portia is a pretty practical woman for the era in which she lives. She doesn't believe in the roses and the romance, but she does see that Albion Finch likes her baby girl and that Philippa likes him as well. And she's rightfully pissed at Archibald for daring to stand in the way of their daughter's happiness. I don't know about you, but I honestly don't see any other mother in Bridgerton going that far, searching the private documents and papers of their husband's study to try and unearth a secret for the sake of protecting their children's happiness. I don't see Araminta Cowper doing that. I don't see Violet Bridgerton doing that either. And even Lady Danbury isn't searching the private quarters of her husband, the late Lord Danbury. If she had, she would have realized earlier than before he died and left her with nothing, that he had squandered their wealth away for the chance to be a more involved part of the landed gentry. Nobody is doing it quite like Portia. And in season 2, she continues that streak. She takes the initiative to secure their home. And when I use their in this case, I am referring to both her daughters and Portia herself. But first trying to hook up Prudence with Jack. And I know a lot of people are of the opinion that Portia was trying to sell off Prudence for her own benefit, and honestly, I do not agree. We are told and we get to see in the story that she let go of the rest of the servants after Archibald died because they didn't have the money to keep them. We can probably infer that the reason why Varley stayed is out of loyalty to Portia. They were on the verge of losing their home and being kicked out. And we could already see from the story that as much as Araminta acted friendly with Portia, it was more of a competitive friendliness with several shades of nosy than it was a real friendship. There was a very high possibility that if Cressida had married Jack Featherington, the new Lady Featherington would definitely have kicked Portia and her daughters out, especially with there being no love lost between Pen and Cressida. And so Portia took the initiative to protect her daughters and her home. She convinces Prudence to try and seduce Jack. Prudence doesn't mind because Jack was quite attractive. He was the new Lord Featherington, the owner of their estate, and he was charming and handsome, and we see that Prudence liked the idea of being with him. And when Portia noticed that Jack still wasn't set on Prudence, she took things a step further to arrange the situation and force the circumstances that would leave Jack with no choice but to ask for Prudence's hand. It works. And when she learns that Jack is broker than Archibald Featherington was, and now her family is in danger again, she once again steps up to the plate to protect them. Yes, her method is very unorthodox and illegal, but she does take initiative in trying to solve the problem and help protect her girls. It is what she does. It is who she is as a mother. And I love that about her. Every decision that Portia takes is basically her spitting in the face of fate, unwilling to allow circumstances beyond her control dictate how her family would fare. She's the very definition of someone who rebels against her circumstances. And it is in that active rebellion that she's able to find a way out. Because once again, I do think a lot of the fandom do her a disservice. I have seen videos and comments on my videos who claim that Portia's decisions always make the situations worse. And I wonder if they do not realize that the reason why they can make that claim is because we as the audience do have an omniscient view of things. We can categorically make such statements because we know what the characters in these stories do not. Portia is always working from the space of the knowledge she has access to and how she can help her family navigate the situation they are in a way that is favorable to them all. Often with the Featheringtons, the script is already written, and the expectation is that they make do with whatever they've been given. Fate meant that Archibald Featherington was killed just as the family was on the brink of recovering from financial collapse, and his death put them right back on the path of ruin. And yes, I say this with the full knowledge that the title passed on to Jack Featherington, because Jack might have been a Featherington, but he wasn't necessarily a part of their family. He wasn't going to root for them or prioritize their interest and happiness first. And from what we and Portia eventually realize, he has an agenda to serve his own personal interests. His Rubin mining business is a dud and he needs a way to get money, by marrying into a wealthy family. And if this wealthy family tells him, for example, that he should kick out the Featherington women, can you in good conscience say that Jack Featherington would refuse that request, considering that it will serve his own aims and interests? Jack isn't a saint, nor is he altruistic. And so Portia's refusal to let circumstances push her family out in the cold is what led to her taking action to make sure that that wouldn't happen to them. And I will always applaud that. Once again, I don't see that happening with either Violet or Mary, who were so devastated by the loss of the men they loved that they basically left their family to their own devices. And I know someone will say that the only reason why Portia wasn't as devastated as Violet and Mary was because she didn't love Archibald, and so the pain of losing him wasn't as great. And to that I point out that she had the chance at a romance and a happy ever after with Jack and turned him down. She wasn't even tempted by that possibility because to her, prioritizing her daughter's happiness was greater than everything else she could possibly have in a potential love affair with a much younger man who wanted her to run away with him and abandon her family. And instead, she uses that relationship to secure her daughter's inheritance and future, taking the initiative to forge a document that would ensure that their father's property and title would pass on to their offspring. And I need a lot of us in the fandom to recognize how big a boss move, a mother move that was. This is Portia actively choosing to circumvent societal norms and expectations that state that daughters can't inherit titles from their fathers, and instead making sure that her daughters still get the chance to keep that part of their father by passing it on to their son, who becomes the de facto Lord Featherington. No one else is doing it quite like her. And I can just imagine that Mrs. Bennet is somewhere in the real Regency England cheering on Portia for that decision. Because a lot of what drives Mrs. Bennet's decisions and choices and concerns in Pride and Prejudice is how her daughters would be cared for when they have no brothers and their father's estate will be going to his relative. I think Mrs. Bennet would have admired Portia Featherington greatly for the decisions she took for those girls. I know I do. Going to battle for her daughters, whether it is challenging Archibald Featherington for being such a shitty father that he would sacrifice his daughter's reputation for the sake of paying off his debt to Marina's father, or calling him out for squandering away his daughter's dowries, is something that Portia consistently does in the show. And the reason why I keep bringing up how she's willing to step up to Archibald is because every time I think back to Araminta Cowper's interaction with Lord Cowper and how she's so easily cowed in the face of decisions that affect her daughter's happiness and future, it is in such a marked contrast to how Portia navigates her marriage to Archibald Featherington. We see that with Portia, she's always willing to fight. Even with the crown being onto her and suspecting that the document granting the Featherington estate and the title of Lord Featherington to whichever of her daughters bear a son, that document still stands. Till the end of season 3, we see that with the help of Penelope, she and Pen are able to give an excuse, a reason for where her new wealth came from. And the title stays within her family and passes on to Penelope's son. All her hard work and the fight she fought paid off. and did so in a way that is beyond what anyone else would ever imagine. Because Portia Featherington is quite frankly in a class of her own. And finally, Portia is a mother who is always willing to speak the most unpleasant truths to her family. She calls out the lies and secrets of Archibald until he breaks down in tears and confesses his gambling debts to her and the state that he subjected their family to. She calls out the hypocrisy that is Jack Featherington, wanting her to leave her daughters to their fate and run away with him because he owes no allegiance to the girls and is stupid enough to forget that she's a mother first and foremost. And I know a lot of people might not agree with this, but even her words to Pen might have been a bit harsh. But to Portia, she was trying to help her daughter see the light of her situation. That love and romance weren't really as important in their world. That security was important and Pen needed to keep that in mind. Once again, remember, unlike the audience, Portia is not omniscient. She has no knowledge of Colin's interest in her daughter or that Pen has loved Colin for years. She has no idea that Penelope is Lady Whistledown, and so is set as far as security is concerned. Pen's interest is on romance and love because she's got the security bit covered. But how was Portia supposed to know that? She was giving her advice based off of the information she had, and I don't hold that against her. Nor do I hold her asking if Pen had entrapped Colin into marriage against her either. Because from Portia's standpoint, Colin has shown himself as someone who is easily deceived by women. Someone who can be trapped into marriage by them, with the old Marina situation. Plus, this is someone she saw who was absolutely besotted with Marina back when Marina was living with them. Portia had a first-hand view of Colin being so obviously in love with Marina for so long, and there was nary an inkling to his interest in her daughter in all the years she's known him. The engagement suddenly being sprung on her, via Lady Whistledown no less, was something that took her very much off guard. Do I think that she was cruel to Pen in that scene? Yes, I do. But at the same time, I understood it as her being cruel because she wanted to protect her daughter from the cruelty of a world that wouldn't see her as beautiful because she wasn't what their world considered traditionally beautiful, with her interests and her intelligence and her wallflower tendencies. She wanted to protect her daughter from having her heart broken by the same man who had given his heart to her cousin just a couple of years prior. I understand why she asked, even though I do agree that it was hurtful. But we see constantly in the story that even if Portia doesn't show it the way in which we see with the other mothers, it is clear if you look at her choices and decisions and the why she takes the actions that she does, that Portia Featherington really does care. She loves her daughters. She looks out for them, and that is why I personally think she is the best mother in Bridgerton. She might not be driven by the all-consuming desire to see her daughters married for love, but her wanting their happiness and security and trying to secure their future does go a long way for me in thinking that she does stand head and shoulders above the rest of her peers. And for those who wonder why I keep bringing up the other mothers, I guess it's because I do believe that I can't make such a superlative claim about Portia being the best mother without comparing how the other mothers fare. That's just how a claim like that would work, I guess. But tell me, do you agree with me? Do you think Portia is the best mother in Bridgerton? Or am I just talking out of my ass? Hit the like button if you agree with me. Hit the dislike button if you don't. You're the one in the best position to decide how you want to interact with this particular video. Please drop your comments. I do love our conversations and discussions and getting to read your thoughts and occasionally respond. Share this video if you think others should hear what I have to say. It does help my channel grow and is incredibly supportive of my content. Speaking of support, a huge thank you to my patrons who help me keep the lights on. You all rock. Thank you. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, the link to do so is in the description box. I make new videos 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Whilst you wait for new content from me, do check out my last Bridgerton video where I talk about how secrets are central to the Bridgerton story and romance. Until next time, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.